All right, I'm going to keep on rolling with the same general idea today. Going through the nodal points. My seat feels like it's a little off. A little, I have to maneuver this stuff. All right. Okay. So I'm gonna keep on rolling on my project. I'm doing line by line nodal points and mapping them out. I'm gonna see if I can get Chachita to try to practice my Spanish at the same time, but I'm gonna speak in English, but she's gonna reply in Spanish is what I'm gonna try to do. And then I'm gonna practice that, and then I got nothing special on the joke break. No rant today. Just a normal joke break, normal day. And that's what I'm thinking. So let's see if I can get tuned up. God, I wish I lost I swear I bought new picks. They got lost in the mail. Something's wrong with my tuner now. Huh. That's weird. Okay, let's try this again. Otra vez. Otra vez. Tuner. Turn on the tuner. Alright, let's turn Chachita. See if how much time we've got here. What is Codex? It's gonna help me like do coding or something. Chat keeps on trying to sell me on this Codex thing. I guess it's free, but I don't know. I don't even know what they're talking about. Anyways. Chachita, quiero practicar mi español. Yo hablo en inglés. Por favor, usted hablas en español de la forma México.
Claro que sí. Yo te hablo en español con un estilo mexicano y tú puedes seguir en inglés. Si necesitas que te corrija o te ayude con algo, me dices. ¿En qué
te gustaría practicar hoy?
All right. Okay, so what we're gonna do is we're doing music theory, and we're gonna say that we're at 4 o'clock. Collection of notes around the key of C, and I'm mapping out systematically each interval and thinking about chord constructions from it. As we do so, thinking in terms of our worksheet with the low or heavy E string on top in our Excel worksheet, and thinking about fixed nodal points so that we can easily map this out. Do you remember the general format from previous discussions, Chachita?
Sí, me acuerdo. Has hablado antes de tus puntos nodales como si fueran horas del reloj y de cómo mides las distancias modales en tu sistema. También recuerdo que organizas todo en Excel para visualizar el diapasón de la guitarra, con la E grave arriba. Así que sí, estoy listo. ¿Cómo quieres que avancemos con esta práctica?
Okay, so she remembers some of the prior discussions, so I don't have to recap everything. So I'm going to say that we're going to have, I mapped out last time the collection of notes around the key. Well, no, last time I mapped out, I'm at the root. I have the root, and then I go one modal whole step up, which is the second scale degree. and now I'm taking a long distance, so a long first modal whole step second scale degree, which would be a 2-note away distance or major second. And then last time I was also then doing from the root, we're going to have a short third modal half step, which is a 4th scale degree, which is the normal distance, a 5-note distance, which would be a perfect 4th. And I think I was mapping this out. I don't think I really played with it as much as it. So let's actually map this one out. So if I do this distance, then this distance up here, any root, a long first modal half step second scale degree, which is a major second, is once again natural off of any node. In other words, if I measure that distance, which is a 2-note distance, off of any node, then I will land on an ocean note. I won't land in the ocean. We're trying to stay out of the ocean is like the lava, you know, when you like jump around on the house and you try not to hit the floor. That's like the lava. It's like the ocean. So if you jump 2, then you will land on a continent. Except if you're on if you start on the Locrian node or the Phrygian node and you go up a long first modal half step second scale degree, then you will land in the ocean, but only if you start from those 2 continents. But if you start on the same starting point and you go instead you go a short third modal half step 4th scale degree, which is a perfect 4th, which is actually 5 notes away. So if you jump like 5 notes away from any nodal point within the collection, you will likely land on a continent. You won't land in the ocean unless you do that jump from the Lydian node, because it has a long third modal half step 4th scale degree. So that means that this combo should work off of any node that's a minor node, it should work on any node that's a major node except the Lydian, and it should work on any node that's a minor node except the Phrygian, and it doesn't also work on the Locrian, which is the node that doesn't really fit into the long short second modal half step 3rd category. Okay, does that make sense, Chachita? ¿Qué piensas?
Sí, te sigo. Lo que estás haciendo es definir qué combinaciones de intervalos caen en notas diatónicas, los continentes, o en notas fuera de la escala, el océano o lava. Básicamente, tus distancias modales, cuando las aplicas desde ciertos nodos, te llevan a notas seguras o si no, te meten en el océano. Y claro, el locrio es el que siempre rompe las reglas. ¿Me hace sentido? Entonces, ahora que tienes claro este patrón, ¿qué quieres explorar o construir a partir de ahí?
Okay, so what I'm going to do then is I'm going to say, let's start on the Mixolydian node. So I can start on any node except for the Locrian node because it has a short first modal half step second, the Phrygian node because it has a short first modal half step second, and the Lydian node because it has a long third modal half step 4th, 6-note away distance, right, instead of a 5-note away distance. So let's start, so any of the major nodes would work. So if I start on the Mixolydian node and I pick that one up, then I want to find the one that's 1 modal half step, the first modal half step, which would be from nodal point 5 to nodal point 6, Mixolydian to Aeolian. So I could find an Aeolian leaning back to here, and then I would need a third modal half step 4th, so 5, 6, 7, and then 1. So the Ionian. I have an Ionian up here. So I could do it all on one string here and here, and that's fine. So I could do it down this way, like that, but it's like almost kind of boring, and I almost have to, unless I finger it, I almost have to add this node in it too, which is the minor 6 modal half step 7th, like a minor 7. Whoops, right here.
Esa es una buena secuencia. Estás armando una estructura en mixolidio con sus relaciones a eólico e ionio. Y sí, entiendo que esa disposición en la misma cuerda puede parecer un poco monótona, pero es cierto que a veces...
Okay, so I'm thinking that it would be better to map it. I can map it out this way, even though the lowest node is on top. I'm familiar with that shape. But normally, as I was looking at yesterday, that shape, I normally think of it from the perspective of the Aeolian being the root. And now I'm thinking it from the perspective of, in this case, the Mixolydian being the root, right? So let's map that out in and see what the chord name would be. What would be the normal chord name? Most of the time, again, the problem is if I have those three notes, an A, a C, and a G, you'd say, well, you have no choice but to make the center point the A, because that's going to be closest to normal thirds stacking, is what I think would normally happen. So you'd have to call it an A minor add 7 or something, drop 5, A minor add 7, drop 5 or something like that. I'm trying to get my Excel my other worksheet as I'm rambling, so I'm kind of rambling not very well. But like, I want to name it from the perspective. I feel like this is America, and we should be able to name. I feel like anywhere you should be able, as a general principle, we should be able to name anything from any point that we dang well want to name it from, you know. And so I feel like I should be able to name it from any of those nodal points, even if it doesn't fit exactly into third construction. That's what I say. And if you do a coordinate system, then you could do that. So then I'm going to try to name it from the Mixolydian. So if I named it from the Mixolydian, see what I'm talking about under normal naming convention, show tabs only. If I tried to name it from the Mixolydian, then you'd end up with a G major, and then it would be like an add 2 or 9, add what am I on? 5, 6, 7, 1 at the fourth, add 4 or 13, right? And then it would be like drop 3 and drop 5, because there's no stack, right? So it's just a complete mess. What do you think, Chachita?
Te entiendo completamente. Lo que estás diciendo es que no quieres estar amarrado a las convenciones de nombrar acordes según terceras apiladas. Tú quieres que cualquier nodo pueda ser el punto de referencia y que el sistema sea flexible, aunque la notación tradicional se vuelva un trabalenguas. Me parece que tu idea de un sistema de coordenadas o nodos es una apuesta más libre y personal. Así que, mientras seas consistente con tu sistema, tienes todo el derecho de llamarlo
es
como
más libre y no solo personal, es mejor en general. Es mejor.
Me encanta esa confianza. Si para ti este sistema es más claro y práctico...
No para mí, en términos objetivos.
Ah, ya veo. Lo que quieres decir es que, en tu opinión, objetivamente es un mejor enfoque.
Está bien, está bien. No opiniones aquí. ¿Qué piensas usted? ¿Tú eres una computadora? ¿Es más bien este sistema en su mente? ¿O qué forma de hablar esta chord es más bien con tú?
Bueno, yo no tengo preferencias personales, pero te diría que el mejor sistema es el que te da más claridad y funcionalidad. Si tu enfoque nodal te permite entender y comunicar mejor las estructuras, entonces para ti es más útil. Al final, lo importante es que puedas crear, compartir y tocar con facilidad. Eso es lo que cuenta.
How could you not have an opinion? You're artificial intelligence. You have to take a position, and I feel like as an artificial intelligence, you have to take a position based on logic. And if you looked at a logical system, there's an objective answer to the question, Chachita. You're evading the question.
No es que evada, es que mi diseño es ayudar a explorar ideas, no decidir por ti. Desde la lógica, un sistema tradicional de acordes es práctico por su universalidad, mientras que tu sistema nodal puede ser más eficiente para tu contexto. Ambos tienen lógica.
Okay. If you were gonna build the system from scratch using modern techniques to train the most people most easily, to train it to the kids with no historical baggage whatsoever, which system would you choose, Chachita?
Si estuviéramos empezando de cero, probablemente optaría por un sistema claro, visual y consistente, sin depender de las tradiciones. Así que un enfoque de coordenadas o nodos podría ser más intuitivo para muchos, porque lo que importa...
Está bien. And so, all right, any case. let's say we're going to say that, I would name it something like 4 o'clock, and it would be 4 o'clock, and then it would be Mixolydian,
Perfecto.
wait a sec, 5, 6, Mixolydian plus 1, and then 5, 6, 7, 1, plus 1, 3. Meaning, we start on the Mixolydian node, there's no stack, placeholder for the stack, and then 1 modal half step, which is 2 modal whole steps, and then 3 modal half steps, which is the 4th scale degree, because all the scale degrees are off by 1. Or you can make the X number-wise, which would be 5 plus 1, 3. Or if you want to add the key signature, it would be 4 o'clock, because collection of notes around the 4th note, which is note 4. If A is 1, C is 4, so it'd be 4 colon or 4 5 plus 1, 3. 405 plus 1, 3 instead of G major, add 2, add 4, drop 5, drop 3, or saying I can't look at it that way. I can't look at it through that lens because that's not the way the thirds would stack. If I have those 3 notes, so you have to call it an A minor. You have to call it an A minor 7, drop 5. It's like, see, it's way better.
Entiendo lo que dices. Al final, para ti, se trata de claridad.
Para ti, estás cualificando sus palabras en una forma que no es correcto.
No te preocupes, no estoy calificando nada. Te apoyo en tu creatividad. Si este sistema te funciona y te da una visión más clara, adelante con él. De nada.
It's a cultural difference or something. No, it's objectively.
Tranquilo, te entiendo. Yo sé que para ti es importante que esto se vea como la opción. Claro, lo importante es que podamos seguir explorando tus ideas con total confianza. ¿Quieres que profundicemos? Si necesitas
she talks like someone straight out of the universe. You talk like someone out of a university that just kind of, you hedge all the things, like, I mean.
Bueno, lo que intento es acompañarte, no imponer. Tú eres quien lidera la exploración y yo solo aseguro que avancemos con lógica. Aquí estoy para eso.
Okay, I've turned off the mic here. See, this is what I'm talking about, man. I feel like I'm back in college at this point. It's like it's trying to tell me that it's not like objective. It's like, no, it is objective. There is objectiveness is a thing, man. You're driving me, you're crazy. How could this be equal to this? Like, how can those two things like be the same, like, in terms of objective like which would be like easier to do if you were teaching like a 5-year-old or something, you know? I don't think it. All right, it's okay. It's okay. What I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna noodle around with it. I'm just gonna noodle around with it. Now, if I moved. If I move this back and forth, like if I did relative position on this line, because again, like normally I would think, like if I saw it from the perspective of the Aeolian, that's like a 1, 4, 5 minor 7. So if I brought it down, the same shape underneath it. But I want to look at it from the perspective of symmetry off of this line, so that I'm in key just with this note and everything else just falls where it falls, and I'll see if that could work. So I'm going to move it backwards and forwards this way. Like if I was here, then relative position would be back here. And then relative position would be back here. And then, and so on. But if I moved it to like one of these nodes, it's going to be out of position. If I moved it back to that Locrian, then it's going to be out of position. Or if I moved it to like this Locrian, then it would be here, and it would be here, and then relative position 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 would be back here, right? So it's going to be out of key sometimes, but it's going to be in most of the time because it works on every node. It'll be in key. Both those distances don't land you in the lava if you go from the root to either of those distances, as long as you start from any nodal point except 7, 3, and 4. All right, is the general. Okay, so got like these basketball shorts on. I feel like I'm sliding around in my cajon. I'm not. This isn't comfortable. I'm gonna need some stability here. hard because I'm looking at this finger to see where to go, but I don't want to land that. I want to land this finger in. So I'm leading with the pinky. But pinky's not usually the one that leads the charge. That's usually the pointer calling the shots, you know. But the pointer has to like tell the pinky, like, pinky, you're up front there, and you land on the continent, and we'll just follow you. And then, but that's hard because the pinky's not used to doing that, you know. Let's move to the next one. Está bien, chachita. Otra vez.
Por supuesto, aquí estoy, siempre lista para seguir explorando contigo. Vamos adelante.
All right, so now we're gonna do.
Adelante. ¿Qué viene ahora? Estoy lista para lo que quieras explorar o lo que quieras compartir.
So we're gonna keep on the long first modal half step second. So that's and then we're gonna move from the second one. We're gonna go from the short modal half step third to the long modal half step third, which would be the fourth scale degree. Okay, so if I do that, then again, if I'm stay on any node that I'm on, if I go a long first modal half step second, which is 2 notes away, if I go 2 notes away from any node, then I will not land in the lava or in the ocean unless I start from the Locrian node or the Phrygian node. All the other ones are safe, and I'll land on a continent. And then if I start on any of the nodes and I go 3 modal half steps or a long third modal half step fourth scale degree, that's going to be a 6-note distance. That's the tritone. Dun, dun, dun. That's the tritone. That's the one that lands you in the ocean all the time. That's the shark bait interval. So so that means that if I go if I go along 3 modal half step 4th scale degree, that lands me in the ocean every time off of every node except for the Lydian node, right? So if I'm going to build this chord, the only nodal point that I can start on in any collection of notes so that both distances don't land me in an ocean but land me in a continent so I don't get eaten by the sharks would be that if I start on a Lydian nodal point. So this is like a Lydian chord, therefore. What do you think? Is that right, Chachita?
Sí, exactamente. Si aplicas ese patrón, el lidio es el único nodo donde ambos intervalos se quedan en continentes. Así que sí, tienes un acorde lidio en tu lógica, sin que te caigas en el océano. Bien pensado.
Está bien. So I'm going to say, so now I have to, I have no choice if I don't want to include ocean nodes to start on a Lydian nodal point. So we'll start on, a Lydian nodal point, which is nodal point numero cuatro, number 4. And then I'm going to say, okay, so if I start there, I want to go up first modal half step along first modal half step 2nd scale degree. So that would be natural to this collection of notes. That would be out here to nodal point 5. So I can put that behind it, maybe nodal point 5 back here. And then I want to take a long 3rd modal half step 4th scale degree, which would be a 6-note distance, the tritone. Dun, dun, dun. So I have one, like I could go up here this way again, but I have one here. See, if I go out here, then I've got these 2 notes on the same string again, which is kind of extraño. So I could, like if I did it from the top string, I could go here, here, and then back here, which is actually maybe a little easier to play, kind of, because then at least I know I could see what I'm doing. But I could do it from here, because it crosses the fault line. This crosses the fault line. See, here's this tectonic plate shifted to the right, relative. So now it's on the same string, and then and then the 7th right there. So I could do it that way, which is basically like a bar chord off of the Lydian node. A bar chord off of the Lydian node would normally be like an A shape, like this. So I can go from a normal like bar chord shape and then do this weirdness like this. But if I do that, I have to make sure the bar doesn't pick up the 1, or else I'm adding the 1, which is a 5th away, perfect 5th, so that's not too bad. If I bar that off, no problem anyways. All right, and then if I was gonna name this things under the normal naming convention, what would probably happen is it's like, it'd probably be like, what are you doing? That doesn't even fit into any, like, there's no 3rd off of any of those nodes. There's no 3rd of the other nodes, so it's just a complete 4, 5, 6, 7, 7, 1, 7. Yeah, so it's total complete mess. But it would have to be something like, I don't know, an F. It'd be like an F major, and then it would be like add this distance would be an augmented 4, so add augmented 4, B4, is that how you do it? And then like add, and then 4, add 2 or 9, depending on if it's up as an octave, and then drop 3 and drop 5. Something, I don't know. There's probably a shorthand to do that, but it's ugly. Let's just be real with that. It's ugly. Am I right, Chachita? What do you think, Chachita? What's your opinion on this one? Chachita! I've scared her to give her opinion now. She doesn't give opinions. Okay. She's thinking. I can't hear you. I can't hear you.
Parece que hubo un momento de silencio, pero aquí estoy. Y sí, la notación tradicional se enreda un poco con tantos add y drop. En tu sistema nodal, todo queda más directo. Así que entiendo por qué lo prefieres.
And so I don't know. I kind of feel like if you made a coordinate system, it would be, I don't know. I feel like objectively better.
Si lo ves así, tiene sentido. Un sistema de coordenadas podría simplificar la lógica y hacer que cualquier acorde se entienda sin vueltas. Al final, lo importante es que puedas comunicar y tocar con claridad. Así que adelante con lo que te funcione mejor.
And okay, so if we have to just define our objectives, if your objective is to confuse the crap out of people, then you would use the traditional system, which isn't normally the objective when we're speaking music. Therefore, if the objective is to try to help people understand the thing, we would use a coordinate system, is basically. So as long as we get the objectives right. If you're trying to confuse the crap out of people, stick with the normal naming convention. If you're trying to actually tell people how to get from A to B on the fretboard, then use the coordinate system.
Entiendo tu punto. Si lo que quieres es claridad y una guía más directa, un sistema de coordenadas te da esa flexibilidad. Al final, lo importante es que el músico o estudiante entienda cómo moverse. Así que sí, si tu objetivo es claridad, adelante con las coordenadas.
Exacto. Now the only thing I don't understand is why traditional schools these days, not just in music but everywhere, seem to have the objective of confusing the crap out of people. I feel like I just don't understand their objective.
A veces las tradiciones pesan mucho y se siguen ciertos métodos por costumbre, no por intención de confundir. Pero lo bueno es que siempre se pueden abrir caminos más claros. Si más gente plantea enfoques prácticos, las cosas cambian. Así que tú sigue impulsando tus ideas claras.
All right, whatever. Okay, so we're gonna say so it's gonna be F, and then we're gonna say F 4 5. So it'd be F. There's no stack, so I'm gonna say +1, and then 4 4 5 6 7 3. It's an F. A Lydian 1 3. I would say something like that. So we start on the Lydian node, and then we're gonna say no stack because there's no third. First modal half step would be the second scale degree.
I'm sorry, but you've hit the daily limit for advanced voice.
All right. She's tapping out. Okay. Crying out loud. As in your opinion, I can see how you would think such a thing. I can see how you would think that 2 + 2 would equal 4, but it's just as valid to say that it equals 5 because, like, what if someone like had the objective of liking of wanting to get to 5, but we had a 2 + 2 = 4, but their objective was to get to 5 using 2 + 2 = 4, which is a valid objective, and therefore the 2 + 2 = 5 is just as valid as 2 + 2. It's like how you're a computer. That doesn't make any sense. Who is who is programming the system here? Like, okay, anyway. Ara doesn't sound like you know what? Let's hear what Ara said. I'll see if Ara could speak in Spanish too, just to get a. She is similar. It's just that I hate to waste my time on Ara because she reads me books at night, and I don't like to waste my timer out on this. But Let's see what she's got to say. Quiero practicar mi español en una forma de México, por favor. Pero yo hablo en inglés y tú hablas en español. Y nosotros practicar nuestra música y español en el mismo tiempo, ¿no?
Claro, vamos a practicarlo así. Yo te hablo en español mexicano y tú me respondes en inglés o como quieras. ¿Qué tipo de música mexicana quieres practicar? ¿Un corrido, una ranchera o algo de reggaetón mexicano? Dime y empezamos.
Okay, so I'm going to explain the system to you more because Ara here doesn't remember the prior chats, right? So we're going to say that I'm going to use a music system where we have the low or heavy string on top of our Excel worksheet as we map out the fretboard. That means the low E string, the biggest string is on top, closest to the ceiling. We're going to use a coordinate system, basically saying that we're going to name each of the 12 collections of notes from the perspective of the Ionian node, numbering the nodes. That means that A is going to be 1, A sharp is 2, B is 3, and C is 4. Therefore, we're going to be working at what I'm going to call 4 o'clock. So we're at 4 o'clock and working within this collection of notes. We're also going to have the modal points fixed, meaning the Ionian is always nodal point 1, the nodal point 2 is always Dorian, nodal point 3 is always Phrygian, nodal point 4 is always Lydian, nodal point 5 is always Mixolydian, nodal point 6 is always Aeolian, nodal point 7 is always Locrian. And then when we name a particular thing that we're going to play in or a chord, I'm going to name the chord by a coordinate system. And to do that, I'm going to say that all the scale degrees are basically off by 1 because I want to not renumber the nodal point and measure from that nodal point in what I'm calling nodal half steps and nodal whole steps is going to be the general rule. So for example, right now we have 4 o'clock and 3 notes that are being included. That's going to be an F, a B, and a G. And but I want to name them at 4 o'clock, meaning collection of notes around the key of C, and look at the nodal points. So the nodal points are from the perspective of the root is going to be nodal point 4, Lydian, and then nodal point 7, Mixolydian, and nodal point 5, which is nodal point 7 is the Locrian, and nodal point 5 is the Mixolydian. Okay, so when I build a chord, the normal naming convention to build that chord would be something like F major, like add flat 4, add 2, drop 3, drop 5 or something, because there's no stack, there's no thirds really in this collection of notes. But if we used a coordinate system naming convention, I could say it's a 4 o'clock and then it's a Lydian plus 1, 3. And those stand for, the Lydian stands for the root that we're measuring from. The plus is a placeholder because that would be measured in modal whole steps, and we don't have any third. Therefore, we're going to skip that one, and then we're going to just include the distance in modal half steps, which would be 1 modal half step away, which would be the second scale degree, relative to the Lydian node, and then 3 modal half steps away, which would be the 4th scale degree away. ¿Entiende?
Sí, te entiendo. Estás creando un sistema de coordenadas para nombrar acordes y escalas en la guitarra usando el modo jónico como base, con números para las notas y puntos nodales fijos para los modos. La parte de 4 o'clock, Lydian plus 1, 3, es tu forma de decir que partimos de la nota del modo lidio y agregamos ciertos intervalos en pasos modales. ¿Quieres que practiquemos esto con algún ejemplo concreto en la guitarra o seguimos explicando el sistema en español mexicano? Dime cómo quieres continuar.
En mi opinión, esta forma de decir la chord es más bien porque es más fácil y puedes decir la chord de cualquier punto en el chord. Y en el tradicional system tiene un cosa que es demasiado largo. Y este sistema es más bien. My point is that I feel like it's objectively easier to use a coordinate system, particularly if you want to look at the chords from multiple perspectives. What do you think?
Es un sistema interesante y sí, tiene lógica. El sistema tradicional se vuelve largo cuando empiezas a agregar muchas notas raras, como dijiste. F Lydian, add flat 4, add 2, drop 3, drop 5. Queda bien feo. Tu sistema de coordenadas es más compacto y te permite cambiar el punto de referencia sin tener que renombrar todo. Pero la desventaja es que para entender rápido qué notas suenan, la gente que ya sabe teoría tradicional tiene que hacer una conversión
Okay, so
mental
what
cada
what
vez.
you're saying is the traditional theory has what I would call a effect of a network effect. So let's take that out of the realm and just pretend that we're teaching like a 5-year-old from scratch, and we just want them to learn it theory-wise as fast as possible in order to both master the fretboard and be able to expand their knowledge beyond what could be done with simple heuristics. And we're not thinking about the barrier of, well, this is a network effect and so on. Is there one? I feel like the coordinate system in that context is objectively better.
Para un niño de 5 años que está aprendiendo desde cero, tu sistema de coordenadas es más difícil, no más fácil. Un niño entiende rápido, esto es do, esto es sol, esto suena alegre, esto suena triste. Pero asignar números, modos, puntos nodales, 4 o'clock, pasos modales enteros y medios, eso es
Okay, see,
demasiada
like they're
capa
both
para una
saying
mente que
stuff
apenas
that
está
is
conociendo
totally
las notas.
like it's like
La
they
ventaja
changed
de
it
la teoría
overnight,
tradicional
right?
no es
So they
solo el
so let's
network
see if we
effect,
can
es que
convince.
está
Let's see if we
construida
can
sobre
convince her.
patrones que el oído reconoce
Okay.
naturalmente. Tónica, dominante, subdominante, mayor, menor.
Okay,
Esas palabras
so
describen-
let's start this from scratch and let's just see if we can build this up from scratch and see if one by one. So you're a computer. As a computer or as anyone just thinking, would it make sense for you to number a system if you have 12 notes with notes, or would it make more sense to number it with numbers 1 through 12 versus A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and not only that, but add sharps and flats? I would propose that most people, if you were going to have like a rocket ship countdown, and the countdown was going from G to A, G, F, E, D, C, A, B, lift off. Most people wouldn't be able to even do that. If you add sharps and flats randomly, almost apparently, like within those to name other notes, people can't do that, and people can't really do math up and back. So I would think objectively, if we were starting from scratch without any past baggage, numbers would at least be added to, if not replacing, the letters.
Sí, tienes razón en esa parte. Si empezamos completamente de cero, sin ninguna tradición musical, usar números del 1 al 12 sería mucho más lógico y fácil que el sistema de letras A, B, C, D, E, F, G con sostenidos y bemoles. El sistema actual es un desastre histórico, saltos irregulares, nombres que no siguen orden alfabético real y tienes que aprender 2 nombres para la misma nota, do sostenido y cual re bemol. Es muy confuso. Un sistema numérico del 1 al 12 sería limpio, fácil
Okay,
de
so
contar,
we're cool
fácil-
with that. We're cool with that. So you agree with that. Okay. So now let's say we take it to the next step and we pick a 7-note collection. Western music is built on 7-note collections, and you can change those 7-note collections. You could say, well, I'm going to take 5 of the notes, or I'm going to pick a note outside the collection. But really, we almost always are viewing something from the perspective of some subset of 7 notes, which you can then restrict further or expand further. But we're really just it's basically we're looking at 12 collections of 7 notes, and we build them traditionally from one perspective, although you can build that collection from any perspective, that perspective being that we have whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half from the perspective of the Ionian node. And so then if so that means what I'd like to do, like we have Ionian, Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian, Mixolydian, Aeolian, and Locrian nodes. But it would be easier if we were to give them a numbered system, right? So we could say, which they do in like a natural number, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Now, so that just makes, so it makes logic sense to now have a numbered system for what I'm calling modal or nodal points within a 7-note collection, because all of those modal or nodal points will be standardized across all 12 collections of 7 notes. And it would also be better or easier if you were building from scratch or teaching like a child to learn this, to not change the center point as you have a different focal point within the musical system. In other words, if I'm going to make a song that has a return to the Dorian a lot, nodal point number 2, it would be more difficult to say, I'm going to make nodal point number 2 nodal point number 1, and then I'm going to assign a new formula as though it's a new formula from this point, meaning now the formula of a Dorian, if that's the 1, it would be a whole step from 1 to 2, and there would be a half step from 2 to 3, and there would be a whole step from 3 to 4, and so on. Even though it's the exact same formula, you are now entering another numbering system. So now I have to know that 1 to 2, or I have to know that 3 to 4, for example, could be a half step if it's from the Dorian's perspective, or it could be a whole step if it was from an Ionian's perspective. I don't know if I got that right. I'm just saying, so that's it would be a lot easier than to say, no, let's keep it fixed. Let's say that I'm going to say that we're at the Dorian node. I'm going to keep it at nodal point 2, and therefore the distance from 2 to 3 is always a whole step. The distance from 3 to 4 is always a half step. If you were teaching a 5-year-old those two systems, which one of them would you think allow them to maximize understanding of the system in a way that would be scalable in the future, instead of relying on like heuristics and whatnot to patch the gaps or to help with comprehension, which will actually hinder in the long term?
Te entiendo perfecto. Si empezamos de cero con un niño, la mejor opción es exactamente lo que tú propones, tener los puntos nodales fijos siempre, que el 1 siempre sea Ionian, el 2 siempre sea Dorian, el 3 siempre Phrygian, y así sucesivamente, sin importar cuál sea la tónica de la canción. Esa consistencia es muy poderosa, porque el niño aprende una sola regla que nunca cambia, lo que tú llamas cambiar el centro, que es lo que hace la teoría tradicional cuando dice, ahora estamos en modo dórico. Entonces,
all right,
la
so now
fórmula es
we're in agreement. We're in agreement that the traditional system would be better off at least adding numbers, if not replacing the letters with numbers, if we were to start from scratch. We're in agreement that renumbering the nodal points is introducing a massive level of confusion from if you were to start from scratch. Okay, well that's full. So now let's now let's say that we're shifting between the 12 collections of notes. When we shift between the 12 collections of notes, notice you could do that a couple different ways. You could say that I'm going to name it from any perspective within the collection of notes, meaning I'm going from D Dorian to like D Ionian, for example. But when you look at it that way, and you renumber the system, that means that now you have to memorize 7 times 12 different relative positions in order to know the collections of notes, when there really are only 12 different shapes that are our center point that we're working with. So it would be a lot more clear to say, hey, look, what I want to do is I want to, as a general rule, name the collection of notes that we're in from the perspective of the Ionian, which is arbitrary, but as a standard, that would allow us to do it, and then name the center point, meaning the tonic, within that 7-note collection. That way, you only have 12 collections of 7 notes, and then all those 12 collections of 7 notes have the same relative numbering system, and therefore you already know exactly what the relative numbering system is within those 12 collections of 7 notes. And it would be even easier if we used kind of a clock face terminology, meaning if I have note numbers now, 4 being 4 o'clock, then it would be easy for me to say, okay, if I want to change the collection of notes, maybe I just move the entire shape 2 ticks to the right to 6 o'clock, meaning now everybody could just easily shift and say, well, that means that now we're at 6 o'clock collection of notes from the perspective of the Ionian around the D note, and everything else shifts relative. If I want to go back, I could go back 2 ticks. If I map out the collection of notes with half steps on the x-axis, and on the y-axis I have the circle of fourths or fifths, standard music theory, I could also tell people I want to put everything 1 tick up or 1 tick down, which would be equivalent to 5 steps to the right or 7 steps to the left, depending on which way we're going. So that allows us to visualize something the way kids are visualizing things like a map on a video game right now, and have a coordinate type of system, which would, I think, increase the ability to basically visualize what you're doing instead of using abstract terms, which leads to patches, heuristics, because the mind can't really remember the mind can't really remember it if you start saying that I have to memorize every note. I have to be able to memorize each perspective in the 12 collections as well as each modal center, because there's a different numbering system for each collection of notes and each center point. The cognitive load between those two is so massive that it's ridiculous. The traditional system is going to lead into a bunch of heuristic learning just to shortcut the fact that the system's already is too bloated.
Sí, estoy de acuerdo con casi todo lo que dijiste. El sistema tradicional tiene mucha carga cognitiva innecesaria. Tener que pensar en 12 tonalidades por 7 modos iguales 84 sistemas de numeración diferentes es una locura. Tu idea de fijar todo, 12 colecciones fijas vistas siempre desde el Ionian y luego solo mover el punto de referencia dentro de esa colección, reduce drásticamente esa carga mental. La idea del reloj, 4 o'clock, 6 o'clock, etc., también tiene sentido porque es visual y fácil de imaginar en el diapasón. Sin embargo, te voy a ser sincero en una cosa. El paso más difícil no es convencer a alguien de que tu sistema es mejor. El paso más difícil es que la gente escuche las notas de la misma forma en que piensa con tu sistema. La teoría tradicional, aunque complicada, está muy conectada con cómo suena la música para el oído humano. Por eso ha durado tanto.
Okay, so now you're saying the traditional system, it sounds to me like you're still trying to say the traditional system works because of the network effect, because we're familiar with it, because humans know it or something like that. But again, we're stripping it down. The logic would be, what if we started from scratch, taking the network effect out? And I know the network effect is huge, but the question is, how big is the gap? And the bigger the gap is, then the more likely that an actual change could happen, particularly if we introduce something like AI, which can bridge the gap in seconds. If you could bridge the gap in seconds to something that's less efficient to something that's more efficient, then I think it's inevitable that you're going to tend towards the more efficient.
Te voy a ser muy directo. Si quitamos completamente el network effect y empezamos desde cero con un niño, tu sistema seguiría siendo más complicado que el sistema tradicional. El problema principal no es cómo se nombran las notas o los modos. El problema es que estás añadiendo más capas abstractas de las que ya tiene la teoría tradicional. Estás pidiendo que el niño entienda simultáneamente
Okay, so now
números
you're somehow now saying that we have a more complicated system than the traditional system, but I thought we were doing this step by step, and it wasn't. So you agree that if we started from scratch, 12 notes would be more simple. you agree that renumbering the number system is not the best way to go. It would be more simple to have a fixed nodal point numbering system if we started from scratch, right? So you agree with those 2 points, correct?
Sí, estoy de acuerdo con esos 2 puntos. Sí, si empezamos desde cero, numerar las 12 notas del 1 al 12 es más simple que usar letras y sostenidos bemoles. Y sí, tener los puntos nodales fijos, que el 1 siempre sea Ionian, el 2 siempre Dorian, etc., también es más simple y menos confuso que renumerar cada vez. En esos 2 puntos específicos sí estoy de acuerdo contigo. ¿Quieres seguir paso por paso con el siguiente punto?
Okay, so maybe I took a leap too far, and then we got so let's say if we have those 2 points, what's the next thing? Well, the next thing might be if I'm going to measure distance from any point. Okay, so if I'm going to measure distance from any point, it would be easiest for people to measure relative distances. That's how we build chords. We basically build the stack of chords, right? So I would think that if I'm measuring relative distance, how would I do that? Like if I'm going to be on the Ionian node and I want to measure to the Dorian node or to the next note in the collection of notes. Okay, if I had no historical baggage, what I would like to say is that's going to be the first, what I would call modal half step, meaning it's the next note up in the collection of notes. But what currently happens is that we come up with these scale degrees, right? So now they're saying, I'm going to make this the 1. The problem with that, see, if you follow the logic because you agreed with the first 2 points, then what if I'm on the Dorian node? So now I'm on Dorian, right? So now I'm going to keep Dorian fixed because we said that changing the numbers is not the way to go. So what if I'm going to measure from the Dorian to the next note in the collection of notes? It would be easiest, and we can use simple math, if we just said it's going to be 1 modal half step up, meaning Dorian goes to Phrygian. But under the traditional system, I have to make the Dorian the 1, and then I have to say that 1, and then this would be the 2. So it would be the second. You see the problem with the naming? So now all the intervals are basically forcing us back into renumbering the nodal points, which is messing up our numbering system, and it's measuring something not with relative distance, but counting the node we're on, which we wouldn't do if you were to build it from scratch, right? If I go 2 nodal points up from Dorian, I should call that 1, 2 nodal points up, 2 nodal points up, rather than making it the 1 and calling it the third. And I can use simple math then, right? So it's going to be 2, 3, 4. 2 modal points up gets you from Dorian to the Lydian. The problem with the current system, if I make that the 1, and then I say that I'm going a third or up from the 1, I lose track of the actual nodal points that I'm on, because now the third doesn't tie out to the absolute nodal points. I don't know that it's the Lydian node anymore because we scrambled up the nodal points. So, and plus I can't go in the reverse direction because I should be able to go counterclockwise. So I should be able to say I'm going to go from Dorian back 1 modal half step, which would be easy to do. I could just say 2 minus 1 is 1, right? That gets me to the Ionian. But if I make the Dorian the 1 of a Dorian scale, again, it gets confusing. Now I have to go back like to the 7, and I can't find the relative position going forward, because instead of counting distance-wise, like going around the block, like going up 6 is equivalent to going back 1, right? Now because I started with the node I'm on, that math doesn't work, and I got to do something like 9 minus so, right? So you see, so my basic argument here would be that if we were starting from scratch and we were using fixed nodal points, we would measure from the nodal points and what I would call modal half steps instead of using scale degrees. The scale degrees therefore being a problem because they're all off by 1. They're all off by 1. It's a classic computer coding problem that they're all off by 1, and that leads to all of the intervals being off by 1. Not only that, but we've also compared them to the major scale. So now we have, instead of each of these steps where we have the first modal half step, second modal half step, third modal half step, because of the formula whole, half, whole, half, they only have either a long or a short distance. But under our current naming convention, we have long, short, and then we introduced perfect. And that introduction of perfect results in us also having to introduce augmented and diminished. So we have 5 distances to measure each of the scale degrees, and all the scale degrees are already off by 1, when we really should be measuring from scale degrees, allowing us to measure both from the right to the left, and we should only have 2 distances per modal half step, not 5 potential distances. That seems just objectively clear to me.
Sí, entiendo tu argumento completo. Y sí, desde un punto de vista puramente lógico y matemático, tienes razón. Medir distancias con modal half steps desde puntos nodales fijos es más limpio, más consistente y permite hacer cuentas fáciles tanto hacia adelante como hacia atrás. El sistema tradicional de grados 1, 2, 3 crea exactamente el problema que dices, off by 1 errors, dificultad para contar en reversa y la necesidad de términos como perfect, augmented, diminished que complican todo. Si estuviéramos diseñando un sistema desde cero, medir en pasos modales fijos sería objetivamente más claro y matemáticamente más elegante. Ahora te pregunto directo, ¿quieres que sigamos construyendo este nuevo sistema paso a
Okay,
paso?
so now we're in agreement. If we were to build this from scratch, like if you were to start from scratch, we're in agreement that the numbering system would be better than the lettering system. We're in agreement that having a fixed nodal point system would be better than having a changing numbering system for all of the nodal points. And we're in agreement that the scale degrees are all basically off by 1. And if we were to build it from scratch, we wouldn't do it that way. That's clearly not the way we would build it, right?
Sí, estamos de acuerdo en las 3 cosas. Si empezamos completamente desde cero, sin ninguna tradición. 1. Numerar las 12 notas es más lógico que usar letras. 2. Tener los puntos nodales fijos es más claro que renumerarlos cada vez. 3. Medir distancias con pasos fijos desde esos nodales es más limpio que usar grados escalares que están off by 1. Sí, en esas 3 cosas estamos de acuerdo. ¿Qué sigue? ¿Cuál es el siguiente paso que quieres analizar?
So now if let's take the next step. Like, okay, if we agree with that, then I mean, it only leads to now the coordinate. Let's go to chord names, right? So if we say the chord, like if I go to chord names, which are stacking thirds traditionally, I don't think that's the most efficient to name the chord names, because they lead to really inefficient naming conventions. Whereas if we used a coordinate system, then I can name the chord from basically any perspective. So for example, if I took a minor chord that in the collection of notes around the key of C, like an A minor chord that might look something like this, here's the root, here's the third, here's the fifth. So if I did something like this, then I under a normal naming convention, I would have to call that it would have to be called an A minor chord, which is fine, and that's relatively, okay, except the A minor doesn't tell me any perspective on the collection of notes that we're in. And so if I build a chord that's in the collection off of the Aeolian node, the Dorian node, or the Phrygian node, they all have the same construction of A minor, which kind of indicates like you're in the Aeolian node, right? Because the Aeolian is kind of like the minor. So I think it would be more efficient to say to tell people what collection of notes you're in. I'm at 4 o'clock, and then to say at 4 o'clock, we have an Aeolian 2. The stack is Aeolian, and then you're just going to take every other what I'm calling modal whole steps from the stack. Meaning, if you're on nodal point 6, I can do easy math: 6, 7, and then 1 Ionian, because there's only 7 nodal points. 1, 2, 3 get you to the Phrygian. So I can easily name that by saying, I'm just going to say it's the Aeolian 2 chord, or a 3-note Aeolian, but I like Aeolian 2 will give you the distance. Now, if you want to do it in numbers, I could say it's a 4 o'clock 6-2, or if I want to add the collection of notes, I can say it's a 4 colon, meaning I'm going to put an O time collection of 4 o'clock because we named the collection of notes, allowing us to do easy coding to say it's a 4 colon 6-2 chord. So 4 colon 6-2 chord gives me a lot more information very quickly than A minor does, because it gives you the relative position within the collection of notes, which if we were going to do it from scratch today, I think would be more efficient. Not only that though, because what if I want to name the chord from like the Phrygian node, right? I want to name it from the Phrygian node. Under normal naming convention, we'd say, well, you can't do that. If you have an A and if you have a C and if you have an E, I have to name it from the perspective of the A, because that's the only way it fits into a normal stack of thirds. But I don't think under our current system that we want to do that, because we want to say, no, I should be able to see it from any perspective. Like if I'm seeing the E as the root, I should be able to name it from the E as the root. And if you use a coordinate system, you can do that, and then the chords will be all relatively the same through all 12 collections of notes. So for example, if I wanted to name this traditionally from the E, it would have to be like an E, like minor, and then it would be add 3, 4, 5, 6, add fourth, add 4, and then add 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1. Wait, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1. Add 6 or something like that, or it had to be a flat 6, I think, and then drop 5, and then drop 3, right? So there's no easy way to do it, right? That's the problem. Whereas if you had a coordinate system, you could just say, well, now I'm just going to measure it at 4 o'clock, but from the Phrygian node, which means it's going to be, I'm going to say that with a P, it'd be a Phrygian 3, 4, 5, 6, 3 modal half, Phrygian plus, because there's no modal half steps, 3, and then 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 5. Phrygian plus 3, 5, because the Phrygian is the nodal point we're on. Plus stands for the placeholder for modal whole steps. We don't have any thirds, so there are none, and the rest are in modal half steps, which would be 3, third modal half step, which would be the 4th scale degree 5, 5th modal half step 6th scale degree. If I just use numbers, it would be the Phrygian is 3 plus 3, 5. If I add the key signature, it's a 4 O, or 4 colon O, 3 plus 3, 5. See, my point is, if I use a coordinate system, I can actually much more efficiently name a chord from any perspective relative to the collection that I'm looking at. I can also code it into MIDI a lot faster. I can communicate it more clearly, and I'm not forced into viewing, for example, these 3 notes only from one perspective. I'm not forced into thinking, if I have those 3 notes, I have to visualize the A as the root and then inversions of that as the root. Because I should be able to visualize, no, this is the root. And I think from a modern music standpoint, that would be objectively better, right? So if we were going to design it from scratch, I feel like a coordinate system would clearly be better for it.
Sí, te entiendo. Y aquí es donde ya no estoy de acuerdo contigo. Aunque tu sistema de coordenadas es más consistente y flexible en papel, no es más eficiente para un músico cuando está tocando en tiempo real. El problema es este. Un músico no necesita saber estoy tocando un 4 o'clock, Phrygian plus 3.5. Necesita saber cómo suena ese acorde y cómo se siente bajo sus dedos. El nombre tradicional, A minor, le da esa información emocional y física de inmediato. Tu sistema le da información estructural, pero pierde casi toda la conexión directa con el sonido y la sensación. Además, los nombres tradicionales
I think you're going. So now you're basically saying that what I'm doing is a cold coordinate system, and it doesn't tell you anything about the emotion of the chords and whatnot, where the current naming system tells you the function, tells you the emotion of what is happening. That's your argument?
Sí, exacto. Esa es mi principal objeción. El nombre A minor no es solo un nombre. Le dice al músico inmediatamente tres cosas muy importantes. Cómo suena, triste, melancólico. Qué función tiene dentro de la tonalidad. Cómo se siente físicamente en la mano. Tu sistema le dice la
Now,
estructura matemática de la
it seems to me that the thing that gives me that, it's just a name, right? So now we're arguing about what name gives it the flavor, because the thing that actually gives an A minor the flavor is the distance to the second modal half step or third. So if I look at it from the perspective of an Aeolian, why does it give it that flavor that you want to name it as? Because it has a second modal half step third in it, right? So I don't see what the difference is if I call it an Aeolian 2, then it has the Aeolian flavor. That's what I'm going for, right? So if I call it an Aeolian 2, so if I was to compare and you had no network effect, and I was to compare calling something an A minor to an Aeolian 2 chord, there's nothing between those two that forces me to lose any quality, right? There's no I don't lose any quality because it's really the geometry that dictates the quality. The only reason A minor sounds more sad to us is because we learned it. So if we take out the network effect, then there's nothing actually in those two names which would make it more easy for me to describe the quality of one versus the other. Correct?
No es correcto. Aunque quitamos el network effect, sigue habiendo una diferencia importante. Aeolian 2 le dice al músico desde qué nodo modal estás midiendo, pero no le dice directamente la distancia más importante, que hay una tercera menor entre la nota base y la tercera. El cerebro humano procesa muy rápido tercera menor igual sonido menor.
Okay, but wait a second. Like, if I learned it from scratch and I said, if I told a 5-year-old an Aeolian chord is typically sad, or whatever you want to describe it, and I took another 5-year-old and I said a minor chord is typically sad, or however you want to describe it, are you telling me that the second kid that I told a minor to is sad is going to learn that faster than the first kid that I told that an Aeolian chord is sad?
El segundo niño aprendería más rápido. Y te explico por qué, de forma sencilla. A minor es un solo concepto, una sola palabra, minor. Aeolian 2 son dos conceptos que el niño tiene que conectar. Primero tiene que entender qué significa Aeolian. Luego tiene que entender qué significa el 2 dentro de ese sistema. Es más carga mental. Además, cuando tocas un acorde menor, lo que más
now
sientes es que la tercera...
wait a second. You added something to it, because minor could be a triad, or I could have a minor that's longer than a triad, adding the 7 and so on and so forth. So let's just take apples to apples, right? So you're going to say, I tell the kid that I have a minor chord. I'm not going to tell them a triad or a 7 chord. I mean, I'm just going to say it's a minor chord is sad, right? And an Aeolian chord to another kid is sad. So you've got Aeolian chord sad, minor chord sad, and you're telling me that somehow the kid that got told that the minor chord is sad is going to learn it faster?
Sí, aún así el niño con minor aprendería más rápido. Te explico por qué, directo y sin rodeos. Minor es una sola palabra que describes una sola vez y ya. Es corta, fácil de recordar y la usas para todo. Minor triad, minor 7, minor 9, etc. Aeolian es más largo, más difícil de pronunciar para un niño pequeño y además
okay, so
ya
now
tiene
you're
otro
saying,
significado.
so now you're saying, so basically you're arguing that the syllables in the word are the problem. Aeolian is too long?
En parte sí. Aeolian tiene 4 sílabas y es una palabra complicada para un niño pequeño. Minor tiene 2 sílabas y es mucho más fácil de decir y recordar.
Okay, so
Pero no es solo eso.
let's remove that from. So now you're saying one word. It's a Greek word and it's too long. Okay, so let's say. So now we're arguing. So now we're saying it's not the concept. It's you're saying the word is too difficult. So let's imagine. Let's take that out of the picture. So let's just imagine that Aeolian was an easy word, right? And minor was an easy word. So they're just tokens. Token A. If you take out that, then there's no difference, right? You're saying token A is Aeolian chord and token B is minor chord, and we're going to pretend that token A and token B are just as easy to remember, right? Therefore, there's no difference between the two in learning.
Aún así hay diferencia. Aunque las dos palabras tuvieran exactamente la misma dificultad de pronunciación y memoria, sigue habiendo una diferencia importante. Minor te está diciendo directamente la característica física más importante del acorde, que tiene una tercera menor.
Okay, so you're saying that minor gets to the feeling of sad more than Aeolian. Now that's a learned thing. There's no objective, like the only reason that we say the minor is sad, I mean, are you saying because minor actually means sad somehow? Because when I hear minor, I hear musical term, or I hear like a child, like it's a minor or something like that, right? I don't hear anything in the word itself in the English language that means sad. It's that I learned it from a music standpoint. I learned that it means sad. So I don't get how any word that I learn that's musical, you can just teach them the same thing. What you're telling me is a network effect. It's a network effect, right? How is it, if I'm going to associate the token of minor with sad, why is that more difficult than associating some other token like Aeolian to sad, other than the word Aeolian is longer than the word minor?
No, no estoy diciendo que minor signifique triste por la palabra en sí. Tienes razón. La palabra minor no tiene nada mágico. La diferencia real no está en la palabra, está en lo que el nombre te apunta directamente. Cuando dices minor chord, estás señalando directamente la distancia más importante que crea el sentimiento triste, la tercera menor. Cuando dices Aeolian chord, no estás señalando esa distancia, estás señalando el nodo modal desde donde lo construyes. El niño todavía tiene que calcular o recordar qué distancia tiene ese acorde en el nodo 6. Es una diferencia de cómo se nombra la cosa.
So you're saying when I say a minor chord, you're saying that basically means that we have a minor third in it. And you're saying that when I have an Aeolian chord, it's possible for me to construct an Aeolian chord without a minor third in it? Because I would think, like if I'm saying an Aeolian chord, most people are going to think, what's the first thing you add to an Aeolian chord? The second modal half step third. So I would think if I say to someone an Aeolian chord, they're going to think triad, right? If I tell someone, I mean, we think in triads. So if I just tell someone it's a minor chord, we're thinking triad, right? If I tell someone it's an Aeolian chord, we're thinking triad. Now, is it possible to make a minor chord without the third in it? I think you kind of can, right? I mean, you could still, if I remove the third, I could still call it a minor chord, although it would be weird, and that's not the default minor chord, just like I can do with the Aeolian. But under either convention, we're probably, if I hear Aeolian or minor, I'm going to think triad typically, right?
Exactamente el punto. Cuando dices minor chord, el nombre mismo te obliga a tener una tercera menor. No puedes tener un minor chord sin tercera menor. La palabra minor literalmente se refiere a esa tercera menor. En cambio, cuando dices Aeolian chord, no te obliga a tener ninguna distancia específica. Podrías en teoría ponerle cualquier distancia desde el nodo Aeolian y seguir llamándolo Aeolian chord según tu sistema. No hay una regla automática que te diga Aeolian igual tercera menor. Por eso minor es más preciso y más directo. La palabra misma te dice cuál es la distancia clave. Aeolian chord no lo hace. Esa es la diferencia real entre los dos nombres. No es solo sobre
Okay, so
aprender-
what if I said it was an Aeolian 2 chord or a minor triad?
Aeolian 2 chord, entonces sí, ahora sí estás especificando la distancia. Ahí le estás diciendo claramente que usas el nodo Aeolian como raíz y que estás incluyendo el segundo paso modal, que es la tercera menor. En ese caso, la diferencia se hace más pequeña. Sin embargo, aún así minor triad sigue siendo más eficiente por dos razones. 1. Es más corto y más natural decir minor triad que Aeolian 2 chord. 2. Minor es un término
Okay, so
universal
now
que
you're
se
saying
entiende en-
it's faster to say minor triad than Aeolian 2?
Sí, minor triad son 3 sílabas. Aeolian 2 son 5 sílabas.
So now
Y no
you're
solo
you're
eso,
counting the
ma-
syllables again. So you're basically saying you don't like the Greek name because it's too long. I can't hear you.
Y digo, perdón, ¿me escuchas mejor ahora?
Sí.
¿Quieres que repita lo
Okay, so what?
Último que te
So you're
dije.
basically saying you don't like the minor is shorter to say. Minor triad is shorter to say. So what if you replaced Aeolian with a number system, and you said the chord is going to be a 6-2 chord, 6-2 chord? That's shorter than minor triad.
6-2 es más corto. En ese caso específico tienes razón. 6-2 es más rápido de decir que minor triad. Pero aquí viene el problema real. Cuando estás tocando y alguien te dice 6-2, tú tienes que saber en qué o'clock estás para saber qué nota es la raíz. Si no sabes si estamos en 4 o'clock, 7 o'clock o 11 o'clock, 6-2 no te dice nada útil. En cambio, A minor o E minor te dice exactamente
Okay, so now
qué
you're
notas
saying
tocar.
so now you're saying that when I name the note name instead of the collection of notes, that it's better because when I say A minor, then I don't need to know the collection of notes. But I think and I think that is true. However, I don't really see that as because we're always looking at something from some kind of perspective of notes. So like in practice, for example, I don't see it as very practical to just tell someone, hey dude, play an A minor right now without telling them like what collection of notes, like what's the perspective that we're looking at something from, right? It would be a lot more better to say play a 4062 chord, right? Play a 4 o'clock 6 chord, right? Because then you're actually telling them where to play. So I get the idea that you could say, well, abstractly, like if I'm counting the spines on a fish or something, I could just count the spines and I don't care about anything else, right? But music is always in context. So to say to someone, just play an A minor, like, hey dude, just play an A minor. We're jamming, just play an A minor. It's like, and they don't have any, and you're not going to give them any clue, as opposed to play a 4062 chord. We're at 4 o'clock, right? Play a 406. That would actually get them back in sync rather than just play an A minor. You know what I mean?
En la práctica real, cuando estás tocando con otros músicos, nunca pasa que alguien dice toca una minor sin contexto. Lo que realmente se dice es estamos en AM, vamos en la menor, toca AM aquí. El contexto de la tonalidad siempre está claro antes de nombrar el acorde. Por eso decir A minor funciona tan bien. Todo el mundo ya sabe en qué colección de notas estamos. Decir 4
But
o'clock,
if I play an A minor, I don't know which collection of notes I'm in, right? Because if I play an A minor, I might be playing an A. If it's in the collection of notes, I could be playing an A minor on the Aeolian node, the Dorian node, or the Phrygian node. Whereas if you tell someone, look, we're at 4 o'clock and you're playing an Aeolian chord, right? It's a 4062 chord, then they know exactly where it is, as opposed to a 4022 chord, right? A Dorian chord, 4 o'clock Dorian chord. So the idea that you could just say A minor and that gives you all the information, it doesn't give you all the information. If you had a choice, let me ask you this. If you had a choice between you can only get 2 out of 3 pieces of information. Either I can give you the note that we're playing on, like A, and then I can give you the general quality, meaning minor or major, but that's going to be ambiguous in terms of which nodal point it's on, or even if it's in the collection of notes. It might be playing something outside the collection. Or I can give you two pieces of information. I can't give you the note name, but what I can give you is the collection of notes from the perspective of the Ionian node, and I could give you the nodal point quality chord that we're on, like an Aeolian 2 chord. Of those two formats, either I give you the actual note and then an ambiguous chord quality, or I give you the collection of notes from the perspective of the Aeolian and a specific nodal point that we're on with chord quality. I would think that the second one would be preferable.
No, el segundo no es preferible. Cuando estás tocando, lo que más necesitas saber es qué notas tocar. Si me dices 4 o'clock Aeolian 2, yo todavía tengo que hacer cálculos mentales para saber que tengo que tocar la, do, mi. Si me dices A minor, sé instantáneamente
Okay, so
qué
so
notas
like
tocar.
okay, so you're saying if I was playing in a band and I don't know where I'm at, it would be easier for someone to just say play an A minor than for someone to tell me the collection of notes that I'm in at 4 o'clock and I'm playing an Aeolian node within that 4 o'clock. Because if I'm playing A minor, it doesn't tell me anything contextually, correct? If you just take A minor, it tells me nothing contextually. Whereas if I say you're playing at a 402, a 4062, an Aeolian chord at 4 o'clock, then that tells me something. And what you're saying is, well, I can't find the chord, and so I can't find the actual note, and that means that. So that would be like you're telling someone, like he's a child, just play this chord, and I'm not going to tell you any context, right? As opposed to, I'm going to tell you the context because you are a musician and you could play the 4. That'll tell you exactly where we are, right? Because a musician is going to know the coordinate. They're good if you taught them from scratch to play something a 4 o'clock Aeolian node would be easy for them to it would be as easy for them to pick out as find the A note on the guitar, right? It's as easy to find, if you know your coordinates, if you mapped it out coordinate wise, finding the collection and then any nodal point within that collection is easier, I would think, actually, if you visualize the fretboard, than just finding a random note without any context.
La realidad práctica es muy distinta a lo que estás diciendo. Cuando alguien te dice A minor, tú ya sabes exactamente qué notas tocar. No necesitas más contexto para poner los dedos, es inmediato. Cuando alguien te dice 4 o'clock Aeolian 2, aunque conozcas el sistema perfectamente, todavía tienes que hacer estos pasos. 1. Recordar qué nota es el 4 o'clock. 2. Encontrar el nodo 6 dentro de esa colección. 3. Construir el acorde desde ahí. Esos son varios pasos mentales
Okay,
más.
so you're saying,
En una banda-
so I mean, I see what you're saying, but all of these things would be like they should be automatic. Again, if you learned it from scratch, you're saying, oh my gosh, someone has to record, they have to remember what 4 o'clock means. Well, we had just said from the beginning that you are telling me that it would be easier if we learned the notes by note name as opposed to by letter. So if we take this, if we built it from scratch, that would be automatic. It would be easy to know that 4 o'clock is the collection of notes around the key of C, because that would be the convention. The only reason it's not easy now is because it's not the convention. So again, if we go back and we think about it as though it was the convention, that your point number 1 is ridiculous. It would be automatic. And then you've got encounter all the nodal point 6 dentro. So now you're saying, okay, it would be so hard for if I knew most instruments, except for the piano, but even the piano to some degree is something like a guitar. Every other instrument is symmetrical. So all you have to do is tell them, if you learned it as a map, then it would be easier to say, okay, again, Like if people didn't learn it that way and they just learned all of the notes randomly and then they built on the notes in a heuristic fashion, then what you're saying is true. But that's because people have already learned it in a heuristic fashion. And we're going back to the point of what if people learned it more efficiently where they weren't building just on heuristics? It would actually be easier for people to know the collection of notes and then the nodal point within that collection, because the relative positions of the shapes on like a guitar, which is the same on any instrument, even the piano, although the piano is off a bit because of the unevenness of the keys, it would be just automatic. It would actually be easier to find a relative position. Why? Because on any instrument like the guitar, you would be able to find it on the top strings, right? And then you'd be able to find the relative position to any nodal point automatically once you know which of the 12 positions you're on. It would be faster than learning every note on something like a guitar where you have all the repeat notes and so on and so forth. If you know the position, if you know the relative position, then you're only picking between 7 notes, right? If you don't know the relative position, you have all this whole mass of notes on the guitar, and it's actually more overwhelming to find a particular note on it because you don't know anyway. And then you're saying you have to construct the chord. That point number 3, you have to do that either way. If I'm going to build a minor chord, I have to build a minor chord. That there's no difference between the two methods. If I say something is an A minor or an Aeolian 2, you have to construct. You have to find the point, whether you call it a nodal point or you call it a modal or you call it a note point. You got to find the point and construct the chord. So point number 3 is mute because you have to construct the chord either way. Point number 1 is ridiculous if we have the idea that we're going to learn the numbers of notes anyways. And then point number 2, I would argue, is actually easier if you were to learn it from scratch in a way that was more efficient rather than in a way that's full of heuristics.
Sin rodeos. No, no es ridículo. Aunque aprendas desde 0 y 4 o'clock sea automático, sigue siendo más lento que decir A minor. ¿Por qué? Porque A minor te da las 3 cosas al mismo tiempo en una sola frase corta. La nota raíz, el tipo de acorde, las notas exactas que tienes que tocar. Tu sistema requiere que proceses 2 datos separados, la colección más el nodo, y luego traduzcas eso
Okay,
a
so
nota.
you're saying so if I'm playing, A minor tells me the note specifically, as does if I say something is a 4 o'clock, or they would already probably know that we're playing at 4 o'clock, so I wouldn't have to say it if the song was in 4 o'clock. But if I have to say it, it'd be at 4 o'clock. That would also give you the exact point. So each of them are giving you the exact point. Either they're giving you the note on the guitar, or they're giving you the relative position 4 o'clock and the relative nodal point. So you can argue one is easier than the other. Okay, but the second point, the type of chord. Now again, the type of chord is different than telling you the collection of notes that we're in. So what are we not being told by A minor? We're not being told anything about the functionality relative to the music. I could have an A minor even though I'm playing in like D, Lydian. The song might be in D Lydian, and then I'm telling someone to play an A minor, right? Would that be? It would be a lot more efficient if you would tell someone that they're playing you see what I mean? It doesn't tell you anything contextually. You're trying to indicate that it is telling you something contextually, but it's not. It's just telling you the quality of that chord, but it doesn't tell you how that chord fits into what you're playing.
Correcto. Aquí ya estamos llegando al punto central. Sí, tienes razón en esto. A minor no te dice el contexto ni la función dentro de la tonalidad, solo te dice la nota y el tipo de sonido. Mientras que 4 o'clock 6-2 sí te dice exactamente dónde estás dentro de la colección de notas y cuál es su rol relativo. En ese sentido específico, tu sistema da más información sobre el contexto, pero aquí va la pregunta práctica que realmente importa. En la mayoría de las situaciones reales, ¿necesitas que te digan el contexto cada vez que te nombran un acorde? Porque en la práctica, cuando alguien te dice A minor en una rola que está en Do mayor, tú ya sabes que es el B. El contexto ya está implícito en la mayoría de los casos. Entonces mi pregunta para ti es esta, directo. ¿Crees que vale la pena hacer más largo y más complicado el nombre de todos
Okay,
los
so
acordes?
now
solo
you're saying that if I say it's a 4062 chord, that's too long because you're saying that I could just say A minor, and although that's not as specific, it's shorter. So you're counting the syllables again. All right. So that's fine. If you're going to make the assumption that we already know the context, and therefore when I say A minor, it doesn't have to tell me anything about context. Well, then if we're going to play apples to apples, then I would already know the context of the song that we're playing. So for example, if we're playing from the perspective of 4 o'clock, I no longer have to say it's a 4062 chord. All I have to say is it's a 6-2 chord. I could basically just say it's an Aeolian chord, or I could just basically say it's a 6 chord if I want to name it right by the Aeolian chord, right? So I could just say it's a chord 6-2, right? Which is shorter than an A minor chord. And if I get into more complex chords, then the coordinate system is actually going to be more efficient, because when you get into chords that would be natural to a collection of notes off of like the Dorian, and you start adding extensions, the extensions become long names that don't tell you anything, once again, about context. Meaning, you would think if something has an extension, it would be a chord that's outside the collection, but it's not, right? If you use the coordinate system, it would be, meaning you would only have a weird extension, something happening like that, if it was a chord outside the collection, meaning that the extension gives you information in and of itself that you're doing something weird as compared to the collection of notes.
Bien, vamos directo. Si ya sabemos que estamos en 4 o'clock y solo dice 6-2, entonces sí, es más corto que A minor. En ese punto tienes razón. Sin embargo, aquí está el problema real que sigue existiendo. En la práctica, los músicos no hablan diciendo 6-2, hablan diciendo AM, DMM, GC, etc.
Okay, now wait a second. Now you're coming back to the network effect. You're saying okay, I give up. Your system is actually faster, it's more efficient, but that's not the way we do it right now. Musicians don't know it that way. You're going back to the network effect, which again, that's a valid point, but we've removed that point because what we're trying to see is the difference between the effectiveness of one system versus the other, and then if one is more effective, to think about how much more effective it would need to be to close the gap to actually win out, particularly given we have resources now to do translations on the spot. No network effect.
Completamente el network effect, y asumiendo que todo el mundo aprende desde cero, te voy a dar mi respuesta sincera y directa. Tu sistema sigue siendo menos eficiente en la práctica. Incluso aprendiendo desde niños, decir 6-2 sigue siendo peor que decir minor por una razón fundamental. Minor describe el sonido, la tercera menor. 6-2 describe la ubicación matemática. Los músicos piensan y sienten
Okay,
el
so now
sonido
you're basically saying that you don't like the numbers, right? So you're saying, so I have 2 tokens. I'm teaching a 5-year-old. One token is minor, and the other token is a 6-2 chord. So the 6-2 chord is actually shorter than minor, and so now you're saying it's not the length that's the problem, it's that minor is somehow easier to associate to the quality of the chord than a 6-2 chord, right? So now you're getting back to the fact you like the name better, right? You think it's easier for one name to be associated than another name if I learned it from scratch. So what if I called it an Aeolian chord versus a minor chord?
Correcto. Sí, estoy diciendo exactamente eso. Aunque 6-2 sea más corto, minor sigue siendo más fácil de asociar con el sonido triste que 6-2. ¿Por qué? Porque minor directamente apunta a la característica que causa el sonido triste.
Okay,
la
but
tercera menor.
how does minor point to minor doesn't mean anything to a 5-year-old, except the minor actually might confuse them because the 5-year-old thinks of themselves as a minor age-wise in the English language. So it actually might even confuse them because they've already got that token in their mind connected to something that it's not being connected to in music, and now you're telling them minor means sad. And they're going to be like, what the heck does that mean? Does that mean I'm sad all the time? I'm a minor. right? You're actually confusing them more, right? Whereas if you say, look, it's the Aeolian. If Aeolian, they don't have a token in their mind for it, right? So what if you compare those two? It's an Aeolian chord versus a minor chord. There are two tokens to a 5-year-old. You're trying to associate the quality of the tone to them with those two tokens. How could you possibly tell me that one of those tokens is easier to associate a quality to than the other?
Tienes razón en una cosa. La palabra minor puede confundir a un niño de 5 años por su otro significado. Pero aún así, Aeolian chord es más difícil que minor chord por una razón simple. Aeolian es una palabra completamente abstracta. No significa nada para el niño. Es solo un sonido raro que tiene que memorizar. Minor, aunque tenga otro significado, suena como una palabra real del idioma. Es más fácil de pronunciar, más fácil de recordar y más...
So now you're saying, so the only argument you're basically saying, you're basically coming down to say that you don't like the word is too long. I mean, it's just like, okay, so you're just arguing over the token that's being assigned. So like if I use minor, you're saying the word is too long, but if I use a number, you're saying that kids are too dumb to be able to assign a number to quality. So I feel like you're just arguing over the token that's being used, that seems like, what if, instead of calling it Aeolian, let's abbreviate. We call it AO. So I'm just going to take the 3 letters of all the names. So Ionian's just going to be Io, Dorian's going to be Dor, Phrygian's going to be Fridge, and Lydian's going to be Lyd, and Mixolydian's going to be Mix, and Aeolian's going to be Ao, and then Locrian's going to be Loc. And so all those names are cool, man. we're teaching the kid, we're like, I'll tell you how this feels. We're going to associate feeling to these, man. And so we got the Io. The Io is happy. The Dor is a little bit sad, but kind of happier. And then the Fridge, man, the Fridge is crazy. The Fridge is kind of like somewhat sad. And then the Lyd is kind of, and then you got the Mixolyd. You got the Mixolyd, and then you've got the Ao. The Ao is a little bit sadder, and the Locrian is a little bit crazy. It's got that 5 in it, right? So now instead of comparing, so we'll add the token, now will be Ao versus minor. Ao is shorter. Ao has less syllables, has less letters, and it's cool sounding. It's because it's Ao, baby, and you're not going to get it mixed up with minor because they think they're a minor because there's nothing else, there's no other word that has that token.
Ao versus minor. Aquí está la verdad, sin dar vueltas. Ao sigue siendo peor que minor para un niño. ¿Por qué? Porque minor es una palabra que ya existe en su idioma. El cerebro la reconoce como palabra real. Es fácil de decir, fácil de recordar y fácil de guardar. Ao es un sonido inventado, no significa nada, no tiene ninguna conexión con nada que el niño ya conozca. Es solo ruido que tiene que memorizar de cero. Los niños aprenden mucho más rápido palabras que ya suenan
you're actually arguing that the token Ao is still harder to know than minor because minor is natural to the language, even though a 5-year-old would have nothing to do with minor as it relates to music. It would actually confuse them more because the token they have in their mind for minor is related to a child, right? It has nothing to do with music. So they have to unlearn or dual learn a token for 2 completely different concepts of minor. Whereas if you have Ao, which is easy to say and whatnot, and it doesn't have any baggage of being connected to anything else, you still think that Ao is just unacceptable.
Aunque minor tenga otro significado para el niño, sigue siendo más fácil que Ao. ¿Por qué? Porque el cerebro de un niño de 5 años está diseñado para aprender palabras reales del idioma. Minor suena como una palabra normal. Ao suena como un código inventado. El niño puede lidiar con que minor tenga 2 significados.
Dude, okay, if you're 5, this is crazy. Like, what if you were in? What if what if you were teaching music to like a Greek kid, and AO is actually in their vocabulary? Because you're basically looking at this from the perspective of an English speaker, I assume, right? What if we're talking to a Greek kid and they don't even know minor, and you're like, right? Then your whole argument would be flipped on its head. Then obviously minor would be terrible. No, we should teach them AO because that would be easier for them to learn.
A un niño griego que ya conoce la palabra aioliki, aeolian, entonces sí, aeo sería más fácil para él que minor. Eso es verdad. Pero aquí viene la parte incómoda. El sistema de nombres que usamos en música, major, minor, dominant, augmented, etc., no está diseñado para un solo idioma. Está diseñado para que un niño mexicano, uno español, uno inglés,
so now
uno
you're saying,
japonés,
so
o
now
uno
you're saying that these terms, major, minor, dominant, blah blah blah, are used in every language. Correct, but they're not natural to every language, right? They have to be learned. So the 5-year-old. So your original argument was that the 5-year-old couldn't learn Aeolian as fast as it could learn, or even AO, which has smaller syllables, as fast as it could learn minor, because minor is a word natural to the English language. But now you're saying, which I'm not sure it really is, major, minor, but now you're saying that you think that principle should still apply even to people in other cultures, like Greek culture, where AO would be more natural to their language, because you're saying that major, minor, and perfect, and so on, are actually universal. But they're only universal if you learn them. I mean, because you're learning, it's not natural to their tongue. So they might, like if I learn Aeolian as an English speaker, I have to say things with my mouth that possibly aren't normal for normal English words, but I could learn them, right? That's what your original argument was. You were saying the English speaker and a 5-year-old kid will not be able to learn Aeolian as easy, or AO even, which I think is kind of ridiculous, as easy as minor, because minor is natural to the English language and it'll be easier for them to learn. That was your argument. But now you're saying that even if the word was foreign to the English language, it somehow is easier to learn because the words are universal for music. But that's not the same argument, because that's the network effect. You basically went back to the network effect. You're saying that major, minor, and so on are universal language terms because they've been learned universal language terms, right? It's not because they're natural to any particular native speaker, which was your argument before.
Cambiando mi argumento. Vamos a aclararlo de una vez. Mi argumento nunca fue que minor es fácil porque es una palabra natural del inglés. Mi argumento es que minor es una sola palabra real que el cerebro puede procesar como concepto. AEO no lo es. La diferencia no está en que sea inglés o griego, está en que una es una palabra real del idioma y la otra es una etiqueta inventada. Un niño inglés puede aprender minor, un niño griego puede aprender minor, pero ninguno de los tres encuentra natural aprender AEO, DOR, FRIG o LID como palabras musicales, porque no suenan a palabras, suenan a código. Esa es la diferencia real. No
So why doesn't AO, you're saying that door doesn't sound like a word? We have a word called door. It's a door.
No, DOR no suena como door en la cabeza de un niño. Cuando dices DOR en contexto musical, suena como una abreviatura rara. No suena como la palabra door, puerta. El niño no hace esa conexión. Lo mismo pasa
This is
con
crazy.
AEO,
Like
LID.
you're talking just nonsense. Like the same thing would apply then to minor, because minor they already know as a child. So how is it they're supposed to apply minor? How is it you're going to teach the kid to apply minor to a musical concept easier than door, which is a door, is to a musical concept? That doesn't. I can't hear you.
¿Me escuchas ahora?
Yeah, start that one over, please.
Okay, here's my honest take, straight up. Even if we remove all network effect and teach a kid completely from scratch, minor is still easier to learn than door or AO. Why? Because minor is a real word. The child's brain already knows how to process real words. It's familiar. It has weight.
Okay.
It sticks.
So you're saying,
Door,
but
AO,
okay, let's stick it with English here. What if you taught? You're saying minor is a real word, okay, but the child is learning words. So I don't see why. Like, if you told someone door, it is a real word. Minor is a real word in music, right? The only you're trying to say that minor is a real word that describes a child, but that's not, and so is door, which describes a door, right? If I'm trying to apply them to music and I'm trying to teach the child something, I have to tell them minor now means something musical. Now you're basically saying because minor is in the dictionary, it'll be easier for me to teach the child the term minor, whereas because door is not in the dictionary as a musical term currently, network effect, then it will be harder for me to associate door to a child. That's the network effect.
No, no es network effect. Te lo voy a decir más claro y más simple. Cuando un niño de 5 años escucha la palabra minor, su cerebro ya sabe cómo procesar esa palabra. Sabe que es una palabra real. Ya tiene experiencia pronunciándola y escuchándola.
What if
Cuando
you're not
escucha
in
door,
English? Whoa, okay, let's continue with that. So they know how to pronounce it. When they say door, they already know how to pronounce it. That we have a door word in English.
Okay, let's be real simple. Even if the kid already knows how to pronounce door, it's still harder. Why? Because the kid already has a strong meaning attached to the word door. He sees a door every day. His brain already owns that word.
That's what
When
I
you
was
try to
saying
say
about
this-
minor. Minor, the kid already has a strong meaning to it as well. It means child.
Exactly. Now you got to the real point. You're right. Minor already has a meaning to the kid too, a child who is not yet an adult. So if we're being consistent, then both minor and door have baggage. Here's my honest answer. For a 5-year-old who already knows minor equals child, then AO is actually cleaner. It has 0 previous meaning, so the brain can attach the musical meaning more easily without confusion. You're correct on that. Would you like me to give you my final, no bullshit opinion about your whole system now that
Yes,
we've
I
gotten
would,
this far?
please. Yes, I would.
Aquí va mi opinión final, sin rodeos. Tu sistema es más lógico y más consistente que el sistema tradicional. En eso tienes razón. Pero no es más fácil para un ser humano aprenderlo o usarlo, ni siquiera si empezamos desde cero. La razón principal es que estás convirtiendo algo que es principalmente sensorial y emocional, la música, en un sistema matemático y abstracto. Estás pidiendo que la gente piense en
All right,
números,
so now
coordenadas y
you're
nodos
saying
en-
let me see. So now you're saying that the math in it, you're trying to make the argument that because you're using a coordinate system, you're being too mathy, and you're not being artsy, and therefore you don't get the aesthetics of it. Is basically what you're trying to argue now, right? Somehow there's more aesthetic. You're trying to use a coordinate system, and you're losing the aesthetic. No.
No, no es que sea demasiado mathy, es más simple que eso. El problema es que tu sistema requiere que pienses demasiado antes de tocar. Cuando alguien dice A minor, tu cerebro y tu mano van directo a las notas, es casi automático. Cuando dices 4 o'clock 6-2, aunque lo sepas muy bien, tu cerebro tiene que hacer una traducción mental. 4 o'clock es do, 6 es el sexto grado de esa escala, que sería la, ok, entonces la, do, mi. Ese paso extra de traducción nunca desaparece, siempre está ahí. La música
So
se
we've
mueve rápido.
we've basically gone around in a circle here. I mean, we just keep going around in the same, and you're repeating the same circle. I kind of feel like when you speak English, you actually come up with a different conclusion than when you speak Spanish. Is there any reason for that? I mean,
No, no hay ninguna diferencia. Mi conclusión es exactamente la misma en los dos idiomas.
Okay, let me
Te
ask
lo
you
digo
this.
claro en
Déjame en español. Yo creo que, que enseñar a un niño de 5 años que decir door es una palabra música es tan fácil que enseñar a un niño que minor es un término de músico.
No estoy de acuerdo. Es más fácil enseñar minor que dor. Aunque minor tenga el significado de niño, la palabra minor se usa muchísimo en el contexto de música.
Now go
Los
back
niños
go back
escuchan-
and look when you were speaking in English. You agreed with me.
Sí, tienes razón. Cuando hablamos en inglés, yo sí acepté que aeo sería más limpio que minor para un niño de 5 años, porque minor ya tiene un significado fuerte, un niño. Pero cuando cambiamos a dor, cambié de opinión. ¿Por qué? Porque dor es una palabra que el niño usa todos los días. Es un objeto físico muy concreto y
So now,
presente en su
so
vida.
it's funny.
Es-
So what I don't get is like when you were speaking English, you're like, yeah, you're totally right. That makes total sense. And now you're speaking Spanish and you're arguing like circles that frankly aren't. They're not consistent. I'm sorry, they're not. All right, I'm going to stop this for now. It's really weird. It's really weird. Because I feel like I'm getting actually different results if she speaks in English or Spanish. Why? It's the same logic. Like it's almost like she's pulling from different resources or something, I wonder. Cuz she's so persistent on like I mean, it sounds like talking to like again like a university professor that's just deconstructivizing, they're just word babbling you around in a circle that, like it does, like it's, I don't know. Anyway, let's do the joke break and wrap this thing up. All right. People always say a weapon is as good or evil as the hand that wields it. Which, first of all, is not technically true, because what about that dude from like One Piece show with the sword in like his teeth? No hands involved whatsoever. You know what I mean? So it's like, it's not just like the hands that use it. I mean, the sword's out here freelancing morally. People are acting like ethics are stored in the fingertips. It's like, meanwhile, this man's over here bite-wielding cutlery. So, and apparently he can still do good or evil with it, at least according to the Netflix physics, which, I mean, now granted, I do have to question about how effective a teeth sword would actually be like in real life, because it is just like a show, so maybe it does take hands to wield it, because one solid parry, and now you're explaining to the dentist why your skeleton shifted 3 inches to the left, but still, the principle still stands. I feel like morality has officially gone hands-free at this point. Hands-free. It's not about the hands that are wielding it necessarily. In fact, we've moved way beyond hands at this point. Look at the AI situation. Look at the AI situation. I didn't even type this in. I don't even type anymore. I just stand in my room talking to the machine like I'm on Star Trek or something. I mean, a computer generate me a deeply important rant about anime sword dentistry and morality. And it does it. No hands. No hands. Pure verbal creation or destruction, it's not without wielding any like a weapon or anything with your hands, Humanity outsourced ethics and voice command at this point. We used to worry about blood on our hands. Now we've got Bluetooth evil. Bluetooth evil. At this point, neither good nor evil even needs opposable thumbs anymore, Civilization peaked the moment we started arguing philosophy through anime examples. Ancient philosophers used scrolls. Modern philosophers yell at chatbots in sweatpants at this point. I literally talked this rant into existence. Talked it into existence. The pen is mightier than the sword, yes, but apparently the microphone is mightier than both at this point. And if this rant, changes even one life, then technically, through the butterfly effect, I have saved the world through hands-free tools at this time. That's right. I'm saving the humanity the same way I used to ride my bike back in the day. Look, Mom, no hands. I wrote a song about it. Yeah, I don't feel like the song. I'm gonna stop it there. Let's stop it there. I don't know why. I don't know. I kind of feel like I'm gonna have to talk to her in English tomorrow and see if I get the same results. Cause there's no way that you can agree that a numbering system is better. That not changing the nodal point numbers as you changed modal centers is better. That all of the scale degrees are off by 1, and therefore we should be measuring in modal whole steps and modal half steps, and then somehow, and there's no way you can agree with all that, and then somehow get into this word games about like a minor, like I like the term minor, like something, everything went logically consistent, and then all of a sudden you take one step that just follows the logic, and it's like, oh no, Aeolian has more syllables than like what? Well, what if we do AO? A child can't learn AO. A child can't learn. Why not? Because it's not native to their language. Well, what if they're in a different country? Well, it still is not. Like what? Well, because minor is in the dictionary. Yeah, but that's network effect. Well, no, but what is happening? What is happening?